Hey there guys, it's me TheTacticalBrit, and recently a topic that came up whilst we were over in Stockholm and talking to Dives was about the sandbox environment of Battlefield 5. Now, you guys know what I'm talking about. Battlefield has always, it has the modes and it has the gameplay to back it up, but it ultimately is a sandbox experience. You spawn into a map and the world is your oyster, whether it's tanks, helicopters, jets, buggies, flying in the air in things that definitely shouldn't be in the air. Explosives, destruction. Battlefield is a huge sandbox environment, and I think some of the best video clips and some of the best sort of material for Battlefield is these only in Battlefield moments because of the sandbox, because of the rendezvous, because of C4 launching and everything in between. And today I want to talk about that sandbox environment, and more importantly, where it's kind of disappeared in Battlefield 5 and why I feel this has happened. Now, this isn't a criticism of Battlefield 5 because the game does things incredibly well, and I do still really enjoy it for the most part. There are lots of things that I have discrepancies with and a lot of criticisms that I have, but ultimately I think this is just about the fact that they've shifted into a certain direction and that I think it needs a shift back another way. So the first problem with Battlefield 5 in terms of why the sandbox experience has somewhat disappeared, it's really down to the constraints of the time period, and I think this is something that shows in the game, and I think it showed in terms of some of the community backlash that the game has had as well. When people hear World War II, they have expectations of how World War II is. They believe it's gritty, they believe it's dirty, they believe, there's minimal ammunition, there's low health, there's, slow turrets, there's everything in between, there's meaty machine guns that overheat. And with that kind of expectations brings things like the fact that tanks have slow turret turning on them in Battlefield 5, and the fact that, the Panzerfaust has an obscene amount of dip on it like the Piat does as well. And the way just certain things operate within the game, the physicality of it all, is very much different from Battlefield 4. If you go back and play, that game was a springboard. It was bounce around, have a hell of a lot of fun. And this sort of realism aspect to it that Battlefield is sort of pushing now in terms of 5, I think has mostly come from the time period. I think it comes from those expectations. But ultimately, I don't actually think that it's ever really been something in the franchise. Maybe in the early days of 1942 and BF2 to a degree, but even they had the sandbox environment more or less a bit more fun and a bit more nailed down. I feel as though the DICE developers are almost unfortunate in a way, because I think if they'd put something like tank launching or buggy launching in the game, and that was just something that was fun and a bit quirky about Battlefield in the past, people would be up in arms about it. It just seems that the World War II expectation has changed the expectations of the sandbox environment, and I don't actually necessarily believe that that's the best thing. Battlefield has never been a milsim. It's never been a realistic game, and we've never pushed it in that direction in terms of the franchise. And the closest it's ever gotten to that is Battlefield 2, but even then, Battlefield 2 has only got that remnants because people modded it into Project Reality. So with this World War II expectation, I ultimately believe that the developers have been forced into a corner of physicality, forced into a corner of expectation about how World War II should be, and it's constrained them in terms of the sandbox environment and the fun that should bring, and the C4 launching, the rendezvous, all the things that we associate with just Battlefield moments, the way jets and helicopters interact with the world. And this leads me nicely onto my next point. Now, something that came up in DICE Stockholm when I visited, and this is something the developers are aware of, and they might disagree with us, and that's perfectly acceptable. Likewise, you might disagree with this too. But I firmly believe that Battlefield has lost the ecosystem where tanks, planes, and vehicles and all sorts of infantry elements actually kind of correspond. It doesn't feel like, vehicles, tanks, and infantry and planes interact anymore. It doesn't feel like they're supposed to interact. And, there are some reasonings behind this. For starters, I feel most of the map design doesn't cater towards vehicles, and the closest we've gotten to that is Hamada, Panzerstorm, and Arras, and arguably Hamada is, in my opinion, not that great a map. But also alongside some of that is just the nature in which some of the tanks and planes have changed. Planes have now become this sort of strafing run vehicle. It's hard to maneuver these bad boys, and you actually have to take the time and effort to line up a bombing run and then rinse and repeat. We don't have the JDAM anymore. It doesn't, these are historical things now. And alongside that, you know, we don't have helicopters, and tanks have slow turret rotation. They're also quite easy to destroy these days. You know, the average assault player can carry 2 dynamite and a Panzerfaust, and if he goes and visits an ammo box, he gets even more of those. And the problem with all of this, and the problem it brings out, is that tanks get scared, they hang back, they don't bother engaging with infantry, and they'll sit at the corners of maps. And in certain maps, they don't even make sense. You know, Rotterdam, Devastation, you know, most of the infantry-based maps, you know, the only maps they really fit at the moment are Twisted Steel, Hamada, Arras, and naturally Panzerstorm, because that was made for vehicles. But even then, they kind of struggle in some of these places. Arras, technically, you know, once you get into the town locations, doesn't cater towards vehicle lanes at all. The roads are even clogged with things that get in the way of vehicles moving down them. So because you have planes that are dedicated to strafing runs, because you have tanks that are fearful of engaging with infantry, and because it seems though planes are almost nearly impossible to hit now with tank shells and from ground and in general, it just feels as though the ecosystem's gone. You know, the days of knocking a helicopter or a jet out the sky with an RPG just don't seem to exist that much anymore. The fact that tank rotation turrets only go so far means that tank sniping vehicles in the sky doesn't seem to exist anymore. And the fact that they just move so slowly and sluggishly, and that almost every class in the game can deal damage to a vehicle, and to some extent the assault class can one-man army any given tank in the game, it just feels as though none of these elements combine with each other, and that was a key component of the sandbox environment. You got these great sandbox moments because a tank made a 1,000-meter snipe out the sky of a plane or a helicopter, and you got these sandbox moments because somebody strapped some C4 onto a jeep, drove it into a tank and detonated it. And C4 jeeping was fine, and not that many people complained about it, because if you were a good tanker, you would be fine. You would be aware of these things happening to you, and you'd be cautious of these things approaching you. And you'd be very aware, for example, that if somebody was trying to C4 jeep you, all it takes is a quick snap to the left with turret rotation to blow them away. Now, I'm not saying that I don't agree with turret rotation being a fixed speed. I just think it's so incredibly slow at the moment that all of these potential shots, all of these potential clips, and just the general powerfulness of any given tank doesn't really exist anymore. And with that, I feel the ecosystem doesn't exist either. There is no denying that there has been a clear fixation in Battlefield 5 on infantry, and rightly so to some extent, because I think they felt neglected in Battlefield 1. In Battlefield 1 it was much more large open spaces with no map design catering towards enclosed combat between infantry units. And I think Harass is the best example we've seen in a modern Battlefield game of recent years where, you know, there is a combined arms element that works incredibly well. Tanks engage infantry, infantry engage tanks, there's AA, there's tanks trying to engage planes to some degree, I guess. And to the most part, really, it's just down to the fact that the map design caters infantry, tanks, and planes incredibly well. And, you know, I'm happy for infantry to be better. It's in a better state than it was in Battlefield 1. The gunplay mechanics of Battlefield 1 were awful, and some of the map design was just, here's a large open space, get sniped in the head. Here's another large open space, get sniped in the head. And that's improved in Battlefield 5, but I don't think we've hit the median balance where combined, I mean, gone are the days where, you know, you'd have Operation Firestorm, then followed by something like, I don't know, Caspian Border, Karg Island, Grand Bazaar, Damavan Peak. You know, so many different maps in the likes of Battlefield 3 and 4, Gulf of Oman, for example, that catered to every kind of vehicle, and, you know, maybe not perfectly, you know, it has gone wrong before, but, you know, even something like Golmud Railway, to a degree, made all three things work, and they were there. And most of the base game maps, I think you can argue in 3 and 4, cater towards infantry vehicles and aerial vehicles really well, without having to worry about that kind of stuff. So, in conclusion, really, I think the sandbox environment is gone because World War II has constrained us to a time where seemingly everything has to be a certain way because history and blah 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 blah, and because of that we can't have fun. And alongside all of that, I really do believe that, you know, gone are the days of the ecosystem where all three elements would interact so cohesively and incredibly fun with each other, because it was always some mad bastard trick about a C4 Jeep or a tank being launched into the air that sniped a helicopter. And you know, that ecosystem is gone. It doesn't exist anymore, and it doesn't show in the sandbox environment. And You know, with these two things combined together, the sort of expectation of World War II and the lack of ecosystem of things interacting with each other, I really think those days of only in Battlefield moments are numbered to a degree. You know, there are some great times in Battlefield 5, but you know, not as much as there were in the likes of Battlefield 4 and 3. And I really think it was those moments of intensity, those moments of pure genius, those moments of anguish of you being yeeted out of the sky by a jeep, that kept people coming back and kept people playing things like base maps and, you know, not really caring about maps to a degree. You know, the end of Battlefield 4 life cycle came and I'd still find myself on base maps all the time with no complaint at all. I wouldn't say that I was bored of them, because much like Royale games, so many different things could happen within that base map that no two games felt the same. So troops, that's about it from me today, the Tactical Brit. As always folks, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again soon in the next video.